Hello folks, welcome back to the channel. Thank you very much for joining me and a happy new year to you. Welcome to 2022. Yeah, you're thinking, why is he wearing that stupid crown on his head? Well, it's not because I've become a king or I've been crowned greatest modeler or greatest YouTuber or anything like that, obviously. It's just because I'm rebelling against the end of Christmas. My wife has been out today, she's been taking down the Christmas lights, she's taken my tree down. And I'm very upset about it, and you just start enjoying Christmas, don't you? And you just start to get into the spirit, and then before you know it, it's all over and gone. And for me, it was all over and gone far too soon, because I did have a couple of days off at Christmas, but then Boxing Day or the day after Boxing Day, right through to New Year's Eve, I was working on my MIg-25 PD Foxbat from ICM, which you see before you. Anyway, I'm sort of in denial, so I'm not going to spend the whole video wearing this hat. I think I'm going to have to just come to peace with it and go through the denial phase and get into the acceptance stage that things are going back to normal again. There we go. Anyway, perhaps I should start again. Welcome back anyway. Nice to see you all. I hope you had a good Christmas and you're all healthy and well. Now, you will probably have also already seen my photo montage build of this kit, I hope, but I always like to do this proper after build review, because I did a review on this kit about 12 months ago. You can see it back in the catalogue there. So it's actually kit number 72177 from ICM, and the ICM do a lot of variants of this, as do Revell, so it's easy to get very mixed up between them all. So this is the PD, this is the original Foxbat, the first variant basically that saw service, the interceptor version, designed for intercepting the Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird. Very high performance, terrifying quite frankly, Mach 3, the world's first Mach 3 capable aircraft. Only challenged by the Blackbird really, as far as I'm aware. So yeah, they're almost in a little league of their own, the two of them. Now of course you probably know the story, I've already covered this in a couple of other vids, but essentially everybody was afraid of it. I certainly was. I lived near an RAF base in the early 70s as a child, and I was terrified of these. Every time that you watched any sort of science or news program about the Soviet Union, it used to come up and be mentioned as this ultra high performance, better than anything we've got in the West. You know, it's going to shoot down the lightnings, it's going to shoot down your phantoms, it's going to shoot down everything basically, you know, and nothing had a chance against it. Well, of course it turned out later in that decade, in 1976, when one was, I was going to say stolen, but it was kind of purloined by its pilot, Viktor Belyanko, who decided to defect to the United States via Japan and landed at Hadaki Airport in the south of Japan, southeast. Yeah, basically he then demanded political asylum, and the Americans and the Japanese got their hands all over this aircraft, and they soon discovered it wasn't quite as good as they thought. Yes, it had a massively powerful engine, pair of Turbansky turbojet engines, but they weren't very reliable. They weren't very good at low level. It was really designed to go very fast and fly very high. That's about all it could do really. It couldn't dogfight or anything like that. It wasn't a fighter in the true sense of the time. It almost makes more sense today, perhaps not quite today, but perhaps in the 90s it would have made more sense really. But anyway, they took it apart, this aircraft, and they literally chopped it to bits and examined all the metallurgy of the engines and the airframe, and they discovered that they thought it was made of titanium, and it wasn't. It was only the leading edges on the wings and the tails that were titanium, where it got very hot on the nose as well, the areas that got very, very high temperatures, to reduce the expansion effect. And ultimately it was decided that this was not quite the threat that everybody in the West thought it was, and the sort of cat was out of the bag. It was a bit of a myth that had been exploded. So the Soviets realised this as well, and they went on to develop the MiG-29 and the MiG-31, which were, the MiG-31 was a direct improvement, basically a Mark II or B if you like of this, but it never quite had that aura about it, and they indeed, the Soviets sold this then to everybody, Libya, Syria, Iraq, you know, I think the Indians bought some, and all over the world it was sold, as they moved on to the more updated and slightly more reliable, perhaps more capable aircraft. But anyway, that's the background. So this is one of the many variants I mentioned. So this is actually the one that I think it's got the worst box art. You've probably seen this before. I'll zoom you in, and we'll get chatting about the kit itself and the challenges that I faced building it. And we're going to talk about the 48 scale version, which is basically the same kit, pretty much identical in 99% of cases of the parts. I'm not even aware of any actual differences, but when they scaled it down, it didn't go that well, I don't think, because certainly reading a lot of reports from other people who've built this kit in 48 scale, they had less problems than I had, and one or two that have got this version in the smaller scale, yeah, they've had a few issues like I have. Not major, it's not a bad kit at all, it's a good kit, but yeah, it wasn't quite as dreamlike as I was expecting or hoping, but it wouldn't put me off buying it, so I don't get too down on it, but we'll go through them anyway. So I'm going to zoom you in here. So let's have a look at the finished product. This is my effort that was finished. So it's part of a group build that had to be finished by New Year's Eve latest to comply with the rules, and I literally finished it at 6 PM on New Year's Eve, so talk about leaving it to the death, you know, the 11th hour almost literally. Yeah, quite a last-minute.com achievement, you could say. Anyway, I have to say that overall I did enjoy it. There were one or two things that annoyed me. There was also one or two issues I had with paints and things, which we'll get into in a minute. I'm going to sort of let you have a couple of views of it. I'm not going to pick it up because it's quite delicate and it's undercarriage, I'm honest. I've got to be very careful because I had to use some super glue on the undercarriage and on the weapons because the fit wasn't great. Not so much the undercarriage, because I think the problem there was that we'd followed the instructions and actually put the undercarriage out. So it's been hanging out there for several weeks while I've been working on the aircraft, and it just got a bit weak and started cracking. So because of that I had to super glue it, and yeah, we had to make a few minor mods. Bring a bit more light in for it here. Now then, you can see the metalwork that I've done. I'm very, very pleased with it, I've got to say. I used the Flory wash on it, the dark dirt, extensively, which has really given it that just right. Because when I'd actually painted it, I thought it's too light, it looks wrong. But of course, if you put a wash on it, you can see and make it look a lot more realistic. And the metalwork, which was a challenge, and especially with the paints, I used the AK Extreme metals, but I had some reactions going on with my metals. Chemical reactions of some degree. I was using other rheologies, you might say, things like Tamiya, the acrylic X19 smoke, and I'm not sure I didn't get a reaction with that. I'm not sure what the reactions were. I could be wrong. It could have been something else. It could have been the clear coat. I got the impression at one point it was the clear coat, but again it's GX100 with Mr. Colour levelling thinner. And that was in a mix of about 70% thinner to 30% clear. But I did definitely get some reactions with the paint, which I managed to sort of recover, disguise, etc., etc. So it didn't become evident. But no, overall, you know, it's quite a nice one, I've got to say. Just get another angle for you. So I guess I'm going to have to pick it up a little bit so you can see it. I'm going to be very, very gentle with this though. Here we are. So you can see, get an idea what the underneath looks like. We've got this sort of metallic areas of the outer of the engines. You've got your acrid missiles, air-to-air missiles, and I don't know if you can really make it out enough. We've got this, some lighting might do it. We've got these, the Tamansky turbojet engines there, which if I zoom in real close, I'll be able to see a bit better. You see that? Yeah, the Tamanskys are there. There we go. That's it. And yeah, the weathering effects, I think, in terms of the tailpipes and the metal effects, really came out pretty well. So fairly happy with that, I've got to say. A little bit challenging, a little bit fiddly with it being small. But it's still a fairly decent sized model, isn't it? You know, it's not small overall. It's quite a meaty thing. So yeah, it's quite a good looking plane, I have to say. I think it was one of the Soviets' best looking aircraft. This really quite brutal, isn't it? Brutal. Look at that. Nasty. And I can see into the engine intakes and the engine bell there. Yeah, you can, I think, just about. Anyway, there you go. You can see the attitude of those missiles, which was very, very challenging. I'll talk about that in a second. Anyway, I'm going to put the model down just for the safety's sake, and then we will get into all the details of what went right, what didn't go so right, and how we got to where we are. There we are. Oh, okay, let's just gently pop it back over in the corner. I'll zoom in a little bit more just to get a closer look. There we go. Yeah, I am actually delighted with it, I've got to be honest. Yeah, what's not to like sort of thing, you know. It's got a nice finish to it as well. It's got this real sort of Soviet feel to it. Anyway, so this is the box. So I say it's not the most inspiring box art. You get two schemes on the box. So this is an aircraft that would have probably been in service around about 1970, early 70s, 70, 71, something like that, onwards. And of course they kept them in service for many, many years. I mean, they went right into the 1980s and late 80s. And it was the basic interceptor fighter of the Russian Air Force, so Soviet Air Force I should say. So we'll put that box away, but let's get into talking about more specifics about where the build went. I'll leave that there so you can see it in the background. So first of all, I've got the instructions here. I'm not going to go through everything again. I'm just going to flick through the bits that were interesting and a bit troublesome, so that if you decide to build this kit, you know exactly what to watch out for. So sprue trees at the beginning, I'm not worried about that. Everything's fine at the beginning. We've got the usual sort of cockpit build-up going on. Now I decided not to, I should just say this, because I was a bit lazy here, I decided deliberately not to bother with too much cockpit detail. I'm just going to get some more light down from up here because it's a little bit darker for it, if you don't mind. There we go, that's a bit better. So what I did is I didn't do any seat belts and things like that because this aircraft has got such tiny windows and I was going to have the cockpit canopy closed anyway. There was no point, and I don't regret that decision. You really cannot see any meaningful detail. It's got a lovely instrument panel. If you saw the photo montage, I got the instruments and the stick and all the switches really nice, I thought, considering it's built out of the box. No aftermarket is on this model at all. But yeah, I think I did it okay, you know. But I didn't go any extra mile because I just thought it was worthless. And you know what? At this scale, I wouldn't say that's true of the 148, but at this scale, I think it's probably pointless. So I wouldn't waste your money on any aftermarket. That's my take on it. Anyway, back to the instructions. So, as I was saying, we're down here in the cockpit, and you can see here. You just build it up in a fairly conventional way, but then they want you, and this is where the first problem comes in, the nose leg. They want you to put the nose leg in right at the beginning and have this thing sticking out all through the build, which is nightmarish. Now I didn't do that. This is always a challenge, isn't it, with some of these manufacturers. They want you to follow a sequence that makes me seriously wonder if they ever actually build these kits themselves rather than just design them. There's no way that an experienced modeller would want you to be having bits sticking out like nose legs and main legs and aerials and pitos and all that stuff. You wouldn't want any of that sticking out. You put all this on at the end as a final assembly. So in this case I test fitted everything, and it was quite obvious that there was no hindrance to doing it at the very end. So that's what I did. I just left that out. Now we'll come to the main gear later because that's not quite so straightforward. You've got a bit of a bigger problem there. Anyway, you then build it up the cockpit, all very conventional stuff. A few notes here about colours and things, and you just breeze through, building up the sides, putting in blah 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 blah. And again, ignore that you've got the nose leg sticking out here. And then we put that into this sort of a frame, the main sort of bulkhead structure, spar is the word I'm looking for. Main spar of the actual fuselage, which is actually quite a good design, I thought. Then it starts to get a bit problematic. Then we start looking at these intakes. So have a look at these. Now this is where we started to struggle a bit. And again, this build-up of this kit is exactly the same as it is on the 48th, and yet people seem to struggle more with this one. I don't know if it's a tolerance issue. It could be, but you can see you've got the usual problem with these jets. You've got intake ramps and all that stuff. To be fair, I got them to go together really well, but I had to make a lot of modifications. It shows here these little pips. See if you can see these little pips here. Well, they were not beautifully aligned, and they had to be removed because otherwise it was going to be twisted. I would urge you to just sand or just trim them off with the blade as I did, because these pips will not help your alignment one bit, and it was no detriment to actually getting it to stick together at all. The actual fit of the parts was pretty good in terms of the mating surfaces. So there's another hot tip for you. You want to get rid of those pips because they're just going to get in your way and be a bit of a problem, really. Now then, you then bring in your two intakes either side, and then you've got your internal stuff, your trunking, which was actually pretty good. I thought the design that was okay, nice. It's got here, you want to put your lights in. Now I did this kind of not the best way, I think, so I'm going to give you advice of do as I say, not as I do. I would actually follow the instructions here and put these lights in. So what you do is get your Molotov pen or silver paint, get that in first, then use perhaps a little touch of PVA glue and put them in, because they give you a mask for it as part of the mask set, so you don't have to worry about the fact you've got the glass there. Just mask it up later and you'll be absolutely good to go, no problem at all. Then you're building up your wheel wells, which is fairly straightforward, no problems there. Then we get to the main gear legs. Now this is where you've got a dilemma. Now you can do the same as me, or you can not, and I don't think there's a right or wrong answer here. So what I decided to do after a lot of thought of test fitting, and this again, I think this is where it slightly differs from the only in its ease of use from the 48 scale one, because on the 48 scale one people seem to have left these legs off until the very end and managed to get them in. Now at the 72nd scale they're a lot thinner and they're not as strong, and I was very worried that at the end I wouldn't be able to manoeuvre them in and I'd break them off and would have all sorts of nightmares. So I decided to follow the instructions, and I did put them in at this stage, which is not ideal, and this is what led to me getting a crack. I got a crack on both the legs about there, this sort of main leg, which I had fixed with super glue, and he's okay now as long as I'm very gentle with the model, it's fine. But neither solution is going to be ideal. If you ignore my advice and you go the way I would normally do it, which is put the leg in at the end, I think you're going to snap them. I think you're going to have terrible problems getting these in. You've got to kind of twist them, and then you've got to get, I think, 3 locating holes. Very hard to do that when you've got all the other gubbins on and you've got, you know, missiles on and the wings are in the way and all this kind of thing. It's not going to be straightforward because it's almost like a little letterbox opening that you've got to get them in and then twist them in. And I actually dry fitted everything, and I thought, no, I think I'll do it this way, we'll have them sticking out. That's my advice. I think either way can work, but I think it was the lesser of two evils, really. Anyway, moving on. So I put them in, that's why I put a cross here saying, yeah, well, do you want to do that or don't you? But all these other things, I noticed that on the, we'll come to the 48th kit, I'll get that out and show you some parts that are worthy of discussion. This spar here, this sort of bracing spar that goes around the engines, kind of a bulkhead, that was pretty good. It needed a little bit of work though, just to get those surfaces to mate properly. There was a little bit of a seam line that was kind of getting in the way a bit, so that had to be improved. Now on the 48 scale, this is where it differs. It has a slot in it which this didn't have, so they have made some changes, not for the better I'm afraid. But anyway, then this is where it gets hard now. Then you're going to have to put your sides on. Now you need to do a lot of test fitting, making sure that everything is really well aligned and the surfaces are right and they're going to go together without giving a gap. And this is where we start to get some problems. So the first problem was quite a lot of the parts in this kit. One criticism I must make is that they seem to have put the sprue gate contact points onto the parts in some really crazy positions, on critical curved surfaces, leading edges of the tails. I think it was on the wings as well, but certainly on these side plates that form the side of the fuselage, and a lot of cleanup was required to get it just right, you know. So you're going to do the same on the other side. You're going to bring this in and bring you in first of all, so you can see what I'm talking about. So you've got to bring this side plate back on this side as well, and it's tricky. You've got to get this right. You're going to need lots of clamps. I use clamps, rubber bands, pegs and all sorts. But once it was on, it was a good fit. You know, it just needs to be, it needs a lot of pressure, you need some quick setting glue, and then you need to leave it for a few hours. Then we get these tailpipes. Now this looks, to me, I thought this was going to be a bit of a nightmare, but you know what, it wasn't. It was a dream to go together this. No problems with this at all, and the finished look of it is just brilliant, really nice. However, here's another tip. A bit like this dilemma that I just talked about with the gear legs, here you've got something that's a bit more critical and you can easily fix. What you need to do, you need to not be gluing this. They want to put it in straight away. No, you don't want to be doing that, because then it makes it very hard to paint, it gives you a lot of masking problems, and they're going to get in the way. And you could do with putting your fingers up there as a way of actually holding the model when you're spraying it and handling it, and etc. It's a critical part of the kit that you don't want to put in, so ignore their advice here. Trust me, you can put this in at the end, but only if you make a small modification. What you need to do is on the top side, there's like a little tab here. It's not actually depicted that well. I'll show you on the parts on the other kit, which I'll get out in a few minutes. But there's this little tab, you can just about make it out here, and what you do is you basically remove that top piece, the vertical piece that's sticking up, because what that does is stop it from sliding in and out, and as long as you only remove the top part that's vertical sticking up, you won't affect the final look of it. So I did that, I trimmed that off, having experimented a little bit, and hey presto, before you know it, I was able to, and you can see that in the photographs, I'm constantly test fitting these tailpipes, putting them in and out and back again. Worked a treat, and then at the end I literally made it the very last thing I did. Just gently, little lick of glue, popped them in, sorted. So leave this out, ignore this, make that the last thing you do. Now, here we've got another problem area where I think the design was not good, if I'm honest. So let's just fold this back and I'll show you. This is the vertical tail section, the vertical stabilisers and rudders. What ICM have done, instead of having a tail that it glues on, you know, sort of Tamiya or even Airfix fashion, they've got this section that it's got part of the side of the fuselage as well. So when you flick over the page, you've got to put your rudders on, and you see I put an X here to draw my attention to the fact it wasn't good. Now what we have here, two problems here. You end up with a nasty gap here. You end up with a nasty gap under here, which I had to fill in with some plastic card, styrene. And you've got a problem then, because instead of just having the tail plopping in at the end, again, you'd leave it off until later, you've got this entire section, you've got your tail sticking up, you've got this area here needs to be masked off very carefully to spray the engine, the sides of the engine metallic areas at the back, the heat resistant areas, where it's kind of titanium, I think, and some part of it's steel and part's titanium, and you can see that sort of difference in the metal. When on the model I produced, you can see there's a slightly bluing, like an annealing from the heat, which is very much evident in real photos. But this, by designing it the way they have, this becomes quite nightmarish. It gives you all sorts of extra work. You've got tons of extra masking. If these tails just popped out, you just put it all together and you just mask around in one go and spray it in one go. Instead of that, you've got these ventral strakes here underneath. You've got a gap under there with another narrow area you've got to mask around. It gives you a lot of work, and I wish they hadn't done it that way. Also in this frame, you've got the top of the intakes, and this is another one that has quite a poor fit and needs to be very carefully manipulated to get it to go in just right, which I got in the end. I wasn't 100% happy, but sort of 90. But this creates a lot of issues, the way they've designed those things. I wouldn't do it like that. You know, if I was sort of Tamiya about to do a Foxbat, I know they wouldn't do it that way. And if they did do it that way, it would fit perfectly. But I know they wouldn't. You know, you don't see this on the Tamiya F14. It has tails which just click on, almost without glue. They're that good. And then it gives you all that area free to be painted as part of the rear fuselages in one go. So there we go. And it's got the same again underneath, the other side. Same process. And you can see what I'm talking about. You see, you've got all these areas you're going to have to faff around masking back and forth. What a nightmare. Anyway, this part here, this is quite critical now, because when I mentioned about the tailpipes not putting them in, the reason you have to make that modification I showed you, where you remove a part, is because otherwise it'll foul against here and you won't be able to get it in. You will not be able to get that to go in once this is on. So What I actually did is I put this on earlier because of the access to spray it well. So I put this on before I put the tail sides on, okay? And that worked really well. That's another top tip for you. So don't necessarily follow the instructions. Get that on early as you can. And then don't forget to modify this so that you can click it in and out and test fit it before you glue anything, so that you know that this can just slide in. And I was constantly sliding that back and forth as a test, you know. Then we come to the wings and the tail planes, and you're about to hear how I was, frankly, like two sides of a coin. I did a brilliant thing and I did an utterly stupid thing. The brilliant thing I did was regarding the fit. It just shows it's slotting in. Now, people tell me that on the 48th it's quite a decent fit, you know, no real problems, but on this, the holes were way too big. There are another thing I should have mentioned, which I've actually forgotten when I made my notes for the video. When you see the artwork at the back, there are no indications, there's no artwork showing you what it should look like underneath or head on. So you don't know what the anhedral wings on this aircraft. No idea how much anhedral to give it, no clue at all, very unhelpful, and then you end up with these massive holes where you can have it straight or flopping. An absolute nightmare. So obviously I use reference photos, as most of us would. And then I had to fill in, I had to put some of this styrene plastic card under that tail section because there was a gap, and here the gap was just huge, absolutely massive. So I filled that in with styrene plastic card, and I used sprue goo. And I have to say, I used a lot of sprue goo on this kit. There were joins on the top I had to fill in very carefully with sprue goo, and I put little beads of sprue goo and then let it dry. Didn't try and do it all in one go. Come back an hour later, another bead of sprue goo, and you know, it ended up looking really nice. But you will have gaps, and you're going to have to deal with those. So you could fill it. Obviously, that's one option. I didn't think they were big enough to fill. I didn't want to go in there with filler and start sanding. And so I went in with the sprue goo, and it actually worked really well because they were quite small gaps, but they were visible very, very clearly, and it worked out well in the end. So I did a brilliant job. Unfortunately, I didn't do such a brilliant job here because, like an idiot, I went and glued them on as the instructions tell you, forgetting what I said to you about this metalized area where you've got to, you know, mask it off. So instead of having one area to mask off, I glued that in. That divided it into two, so I gave myself twice the work. Do not do this. Leave these off, tail planes, until the very end of your build. Now, as late as possible, leave them off, because then you've got access to do all this tricky spraying and masking. So I had to have these tiny little sort of channel areas, masking them off, and I really cursed myself. And I thought, hang on a minute, I was so clever what I did with the jet pipes. How can I be so dumb as to not use the same logic about thinking about how I'm going to have access? We all do it then, don't we? Oh God, I did make a mess of that. I mean, it didn't impact on the finished product, but it just added many hours of work, you know, which I could have done without. I didn't do a lot. You can position your ailerons and your flaps if you want to. I didn't really do that much. I kept them fairly straight. I think in the most of the photos I've seen, they don't have a lot of droop on their flaps and ailerons when they're on the ground or anything. But as I say, here you go again. That's the other side showing you to put your tail plane in. No, don't do that. Just leave that along with your jet pipes until the bitter end. You just don't want them there because then you can't have access to all these intricate areas you need to work on. Then we've got the nose. Well, here we go. This is where ICM get a bit remiss, I think. There's nothing there. Two things. One, there's nothing to tell you about nose weight, and you're going to need a fair amount of it. I probably put about 35 grams in, something like that. 30, 35, thereabouts. And then you've got this, you know, side joining nose, which I never like on jets, because you usually get quite a nasty seam. There's still a faint seam visible if you really go under the microscope underneath the nose, but on top I got it really nice. In fairness, I made that the priority. Something somebody else told me once was that if you're doing these jets, doesn't matter if it's Tornado or a MiG or whatever, always focus on the bit you can see the most. Don't try and get everything perfect, because they often give alignment issues. So focus on the tops of your intakes, and in this case the nose join. And I got the nose really nicely joined, almost seamless, and I just had to do a little bit of shaving, a little bit of sanding just to get it absolutely perfect. It's come out. That nose looks, you wouldn't think it was you know, two side connecting joints like that, like a shell, you know, a seashell. What do they call it? What's the word I'm looking for? Clamshell. It looks really good, but yeah, just be aware you need to put 30 odd grams of weight in because it's a big nose. And you've got a lot of gubbins on this with the rockets and things. If you don't put that weight in, it's just going to sit on its tail, and that'll be a disaster. Then you're moving on to the gear bay doors. Now, people complained they had a lot of problems with these, and I didn't. So I don't know whether mine was just lucky with a good mould or something. But my doors really were nice. Would have helped if I hadn't got a little bit mixed up with which intake goes on where, but we got that fixed in. And then you're putting on your so I'm just looking up at a list of things I've got to remind myself so I don't miss anything. One thing I have missed on there actually is the wheels. Wheels and tyres. They're not weight on wheels, which is a little bit disappointing because there was a little bit of weight on wheels. Now I could have modified it, but I was up against time pressure with this build, so I didn't quite go the whole hog as I said, and I don't think you really notice it so much on 172 anyway. So we got those in. I did make one mistake, which is quite funny, which a lot of people know about this, and it's certainly in those photographs if you look carefully on the building the Foxbat montage, and that is the colours of the wheels. For some reason I went and sprayed the Russian Cockpit turquoise green. I sprayed the wheel hubs that colour and didn't even realise until quite late on in the build when I actually then sprayed the hubs of the nose wheel, which I hadn't painted until that point. And then I instantly realised, hang on a minute, this is not right. Why does it look like Kermit the Frog? You know, it's kind of wrong. And then I realised that I got the main wheels wrong, so I had to respray them. So that was another mistake I made. Just happens, doesn't it? Now then we get into a little area that was a bit poor, if I'm honest. The rockets. First of all, they've made them in 4 parts in a most bizarre sort of choice of engineering. I don't know why they've done this. You think of Great Wall Hobby and they have these wonderful one-piece slide moulded rockets that are really spot on accurate. Look at this. This is just Join City, and if you're not careful it's Gap City, Seam City and everything else. Look, you've got two little sort of pointless sides that go on afterwards. Why they couldn't have moulded them all in one or at least 2 is beyond me. That created a lot of work here, lots of clean up. Again, the sprue gate attachment points were nasty, a lot of work was needed there. And then worse was the actual point at which the location points that these join onto the pylons. There was no kind of depth to them, either on the rocket missiles themselves or the pylon, you know, the sort of male versus the female part that was in the rocket. There was no depth to anything. There was no way it was going to stick. So of course you can find ways around these things. I used super glue in the end. I used the Tamiya super glue. I'm allergic to super glue and I don't like using it. CA and me do not get on. But the Tamiya product just doesn't smell as strong as others do, and it is very good. It does actually bond pretty quick without using any kind of actuator spray, or what's the word I'm looking for? The setting spray. Doesn't need that. As soon as it comes into contact with something, it seems to. It's not instant bond, but it just 2 to 3 seconds and it bonds. So it's pretty quick. And that was the only way I could get, and it was nightmarish because you've got to try and get the alignment on because you've got such poor location points. Getting the alignment front to rear, that was really difficult, really tricky on this kit. I would probably say to you, it would be better, and with hindsight I'd have done this, better to put your missiles onto your pylons before you glue the pylons to the wing. I would do all that as a sort of sub-assembly, not do the instructions, which is what I did, and then put them on there because you can't get them to stick on. They just won't. There just isn't anything. I don't think the tolerance is right. It's almost like the size was wrong of the actual groove that it has to go into. None of it worked. So I got there in the end, and this is very much at the 11th hour of the build. I got there in the end. Anyway, I'll perhaps show you more on that when we get into the 48th version, see how that compares. It'll be interesting. And that was kind of it, because I'd already put my canopy on. I did get a little bit of overspray onto the inside. It's not very visible, it's just like a slight cloudiness on the glass, which is always a danger when you have to put the canopy on early. I always prefer if I'm honest, to mask off the cockpit area, put your canopy on at the end, which is kind of what they tell you to do here. But I knew this was going to require quite a lot of spraying and finishing, and I wanted it to look right and to look even, the actual, because the canopy has got a lot of small area of glass and a large area that's the colour of the actual aircraft. So again, it's a tricky one. I think I did the right thing because the final result looks so good. You can't tell there are any problems really at all. But to my, you know, when I've got my big magnifiers on, I can just see a faint sort of like a mistiness, not all over, just a little hint of it here and there, cloudiness on the inside of the canopy. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. You just got to be very careful, I guess. And that's kind of it then. Final thing would be talking about the stencils and the decals. First of all, just look at the number of stencils. Now this is when we run into some problems, and especially at this scale. I think there was too many. I think that they just downloaded a complete copy of the 48th scale, and I've noted that other people that have made this kit at this scale have not, some of them have not done any of the stencils, or very few of them. I did about 80% of what you can see here. 80%. And by the way, this is the only time they show you the underside. It's just here. It's just a great shame they don't show a colour version of that, so you know exactly how it should be appearing in the paint job. But anyway, so there's a lot of stencils. They are absolutely tiny. I mean, really tiny stencils. These are small stencils I think I've ever worked with, and a lot of these numbers don't seem to correspond. I say a lot. About 30% of them did not seem to correspond clearly with the actual. From the image show, which is not very clear and tiny again, the show of the stencil, they didn't correspond, and I'm sure they weren't correct. So there's some mistakes that have been made. On top of that, you have some stencil where there's like 3 or 4 separate little lines, like a little panel almost, and it's one decal, but it's not clear. And on the ICM, when you look at the decals, in fact I have them here, he says, looking around behind you, let me show you the problem itself. Here we have a few that I did and a few that I didn't use. Well, perhaps I used 60-65% because there's still quite a few left. But look at the size of these things. This is a eyesight destroyer. Look at this. Okay. Now then. Fortunately, the MiG-25 in the background is going to give us some problems, so I'm going to have to get that one. Here we go. Now look at this. Now I say some of the numbers are just wrong. Don't correlate at all. Totally wrong in some cases. The stencil that it related to is on the other side of the sheet. We've got several that seem to be, you know, the wrong design in terms of the way it's supposed to appear. And then you've got ones like this one that's near my thumb, for example. It's a good example, but there were several which were, as I say, like appearing like a panel effect, where there's actually 3, 4 or even 5 little stencil information lines, and they're actually one decal. But when you look at these decals on the sheet, you can't see. There's no, the carrier film isn't, because they put it on a very glossy blue background. It's really hard to see the edges. I've never seen anything like it. And there's some that I thought was, it says like, it has a number, and it's actually 5 stencils in one decal, but it's not obvious until you got it in the water. And so I was almost cutting up, making it work even harder for myself, because it's just not clear. And again, you know, the information, the way they portray it, that's just not good enough. Look at this. I mean, look at the size of the way they printed it, for starters. You know, I can see why some people get frustrated, and I saw one chap, he didn't bother with any of them. And I understand why. He's taken one look at them and thought, this is A, gibberish, B, unreadable, and C, I don't understand where they're supposed to go, which is which. And especially when they get the numbers incorrect, that's really frustrating. So that was the first major hurdle with the sort of decals and stencils. And the second hurdle, and again, this is not just me, somebody commented about this only yesterday, was that these ICM decals, they have a nice appearance, but they are very, I was going to say delicate, but they're not delicate in the way that some are, that break easily or disintegrate or discolour. These roll up, and I've never seen any. One guy complained about this, and he said his experience with them was that they also tried to stick and bond straight away. They were very hard to manoeuvre. Now, I used a lot of the old Microsol and the Mark Fit Strong from Tamiya, but mainly Microsol. I think if I'd used the setting solution like the Tamiya straight away, I think this is what he was doing. He was probably doing what would work for most decals like Tamiya. And then with these, they're very thin and they kind of bond instantly, so they're very hard to handle. And this thing I experienced, even with the little stencils, rolling up and flicking back on themselves. You know, I've got them in the water, and I've not had this problem for years, frankly. And they weren't in the water too long. If anything, I was perhaps not long enough. But the minute they leave the carrier film, they were rolling back on themselves. Very, very, a bit like the Christmas cracker, you know, the old fortune-telling Chinese fish that was like a little red sliver of greaseproof paper, and you used to hold it in your hand, and depending on what shape it curled up into, would say whether you were going to be lucky in love or business or moving house or getting rich and all this kind of stuff. Like a fortune-telling fish. I'm sure a lot of you know that Christmas cracker novelty. And it was like that. It was curling up like a Chinese fish straight away. A real nightmare, to be honest, real nightmare. Anyway, that's the main issues. But I want to just flash them out by looking at the 48 scale kit on the sprue, and I can actually point out visibly, so rather than me just sitting here talking, you can see with your eyes some of the issues and where the problems are going to come. But I must say to you, I don't want to be unkind to ICM. I did enjoy the kit. I thought it's a very good rendition of the MiG-25, and it does look good, you know, and it does kind of go together well. And I think the 48th one more so than the 72nd. So if you're thinking about you like a Foxbat, I go for the 48th. It's a big old beast though, and the reason I didn't go for it was just size. I haven't really got the room. Anyway, we have here our old friend, the 48th version. This is the one that Phil Flory built, and many others have built. Now I was quite pleased about my little one in that at the end I looked at the images and I thought, do you know what, it looks like a 48. So I've scored, and I got some very positive feedback. So I was pleased because I didn't want it to look, you know, a bit crummy, and it's difficult doing 72nd. They often do look smaller. In the end, I don't think it does. You've seen the images yourself, but let's have a look at these parts and just have a little chat about them. See what you think. I'll have to just turn around for a second because we have here. I didn't want to spend 10 minutes fighting that box because, as we all know, the ICM box within the box is a challenge. It's like a Krypton factor challenge within itself. So let's get that out there. I will just have a look at these decals with the. We've just been discussing the problem that we had with the stencils. Let's have a look at the stencils in 48 scale, because I think this will be quite interesting. Let's just zoom you in. Nice and close. Here we go. Now you'll get an impression here. I have to say though, at this scale, already I can see, this is why it's a bit easier. I can already tell, having just built the smaller version, that it's easier to make out on the backing film. The backing film isn't the same colour. It looks it from a distance, but it's not. It's lighter. Can you see? Oops. So this is the 72nd where my thumb is. This is lighter, and it also seems to give a better contrast. Now let's just see. Can you see what I mean? You can clearly see the backing film. And here's an example of what I was just talking about, where there's a multiple decal there. It says 42S, and it's actually several stencils within the decal. See it here and here. Now, on the other version, it was so tiny, and it was as though the actual the backing film, the backing film that was on the backing paper, it just made it impossible to make out. Now this is a lot easier. This is much more normal, actually. You can see there on the camera even. You can make out as well as I can. Fairly straightforward. Fairly straightforward. Now then, just trust me on this. On that 72nd scale version, it's really tough. It's like A, they're minute, really tiny, and B, you don't have that contrast that is kind of normal here. That's much better. So that's interesting for me. And there's this colour difference as well. So far better quality that. So that's good. Let's put that on one side. Let us have a look at these screws because I can point out and show you the actual parts that gave the issues. Bear in mind that these are a different size. And I've just spotted something already that's different. So they're not 100% identical as I thought. I could just slide this out. Oh, we've lost a piece. Oh, there's 2 pieces are off the sprue. Oh, 3 pieces. Okay, we know that's the tank which I didn't use. I didn't want to sort of have mine looking too utilitarian. I just wanted to be a fighter, very obviously. So, if you just excuse me one moment while I just recover the flap. There we are. Flap. Let's focus on the bits that are really pertinent and interesting. We won't worry about them because I know this. It's just bigger though and easier to work with, and you get a bit deeper panel lining, so you get a better wash on these as well. So I did wash the hell out of that one actually to make sure I got a really good and effective result. Here is a sprue that is completely different, and this is actually quite important. So we're going to have a look at that. In fact, there's 2 the same, so I'll just put one aside. I'll just select out for you. 1, 2, that's definitely come off the sprue, hasn't it? We've got the undercarriage legs there, quite chunky on this. They look a lot stronger as well because they're just bigger, aren't they? Now give me a second. Stick that back over there. Like that. Now then, this is where we get the interesting parts. These are worth talking about. As are these. I think this is the meat and potatoes. What we need to see is here in front of us. Right, okay, so the wings, yeah, we don't need to go into doing it like a full review. Wings, yeah, they look pretty much identical. However, the critical thing, as I mentioned earlier, that we had a big problem with was this join where the wings go into the fuselage there, and we had and we had this issue, and I can tell that the tolerances there look a bit better. Everybody was saying, oh no, I didn't have a problem with the 48 scale kit. Obviously that they've got a bit of a better ratio between the gap that the wing spigots go into, and they do look very meaty here, so that's very, very good news. I'll pop that there. Just be careful not to knock everything flying. Here we've got something particularly, totally different sprue design here. And this is the missiles, okay? So this is the Acrid missiles. Now look at this. Instead of having this bizarre 4-piece design where they had, this is more conventional, I have to say. So we've got, if I can just get a bit of a break here. Here we are. So what we've got here is much more conventional. You've got the main body of the rocket, you've got the fins, the rear fins, and you've got the forward fins are on like a separate forward piece. Instead of it all being in one and then having this silly sort of in 4 sections with these little thin sections with an extra 1, 2, 3, 4 joins, which you definitely don't want. So this is much better. Not going to give you the same issues. The front plugs into the main body here. I think that's massively better, 100% better. Not going to give you this weird, very odd design, and then it just remains to find out really by looking at it how well they fit in. And it looks to me how it fits onto the pylon. Yeah, it's a different design again. So the pylons here, we have 2 different things here actually. That's quite interesting. On the smaller kit, this is the ventral strake, ventral fin underneath, but on this it's in 2 pieces. You can see there, here's the other piece here that you glue on, which is not uncommon. On the 72nd scale kit it's just 1 piece and it's complete. So you end up with a tail, a complete tail, and you end up with a complete fin here, all 1 piece, with no 2 parts to glue together. I still think it's a bad design though. I still think that having this tail piece already attached when you've got all this work to do around here is a nightmare. You can see this is the metal work. Look how narrow this is where my little finger is here. That little gap there between where the horizontal stabiliser is going to go and the ventral fin, the gap between those two is where you have to paint. And it's difficult enough, that is. Don't go putting your rear tailplanes on like I did, because then you understand just how tricky that was to get masking tape in, and just a nightmare. Anyway, but that was my mistake. But you can see here they've definitely got some improvements over the smaller kit, and I can see it seems a bit more robust, but I still feel if these tails were not on and were just a separate piece, he says, he's trying to get some focus here, that would make a lot more sense if that was just a tail that's slotted in, because then you could go right over the top and you could actually paint the metalwork areas as well. So that is very interesting, and it's kind of what I suspected. It's actually a couple more subtleties, but the rockets are completely different. We've got this, we've got the section here where you have the top of the, sorry about this focus, it always happens, doesn't it? You've got something behind. The tolerances here do seem to be better, I've got to say. This is where the wing goes in here and here. Everybody seems to say that that's absolutely fine on this kit. So the differences are there, aren't they? The differences are there. On the nose, we've still got, I don't like this, still got this silly nose, this huge nose, which is in two parts. How well it goes together I don't know on this scale. As I said, it went together pretty well in the end. But other than that, it's a pretty nice kit, I've got to say. I think that you get to the point though that, as I said, I like to do these after build reviews that are actually meaningful. So I think in the end of the day it's time to actually give it its final verdict, and this is not the same as the review. Well, I think I gave it 9 out of 10 from memory, thereabouts. I don't think it's that good for 9 out of 10. It really isn't. It's a good kit, and they're not expensive. You can pick them up for £20–25. Maybe even cheaper. I've seen one at 18 and 19 I think this morning. I would recommend it to you. Yes, I wouldn't be put off. Look at I mean, at the end of the day, look at the finished result. That's what it's all really about. Let's just have a little look at that before we sign off on this. There it is. That does look a nice Foxbat, does it not? It's really exceeded what I'd hoped, I think, if I'm being brutally honest. Just going to put some more white on here. How's that? Not that one. That one. There you go. I think that's exceeded my expectations, to be honest. It's a really nice looking model. So, where are we then? In summary, I built it. It probably took me in terms of hours about 105 hours, something like that. That includes everything now. I include all the painting and airbrush cleaning, which I do a lot of. I think it's an 8 out of 10 kit. I think it's dropped 1 point, which isn't bad actually. I think that's not bad at all. I think that the 48 scale one that I've got in front of me on the desk here, with the sprues, you can see definite improvements in the way that they've conceived it, especially around the missiles, which were really the weakest point of the kit actually. You know, I had all these other things like stencils and, you know, wing joins, a lot of silly little things, but that was just damn stupid. There was just not sufficient contact area to get them to stick together. And I noticed, I didn't really point this out properly, just one final thing, I noticed that on these missiles, if you look really closely, you can see they've done it in a completely different sort of concept here. What they've done is had a big long groove. If I cover it up like so, we'll be able to see. Can you see this groove here? There's a groove all the way down, and that corresponds with your pylons. So you haven't got this sort of weak, undersized, too shallow and not correctly toleranced sort of male and female spigot, which were neither of them had any depth, no contact area, and they weren't the right sizes. That is a much better solution. That gives you a chance to use conventional cement and get your contact area, and it'll stick properly. So I think, bearing in mind what I've experienced, bearing in mind what I've seen, but most of all, the final outcome, I'd say that it's an 8 out of 10 kit in 1/72, and it's sort of 8.5. I can't be absolutely sure, but I'd say probably an 8.5 to 9 on the 48 scale kit, and I think that's very fair. That's very fair. Anyway, there we go. I hope you found it interesting. Any of you that are building this kit will have seen some pitfalls you should definitely watch out for. Less so on the 48th version, but yeah, I think they've got rid of the stencil problem. They've got rid of perhaps the decals is better, and certainly the missiles are a lot better, and the wing joints. So that's 4 things that I've got a list of 10 problems. So that's only 6 you're down to really. But they still did this thing, didn't they, with the connection points or the sprue, you know. But they're actually relatively speaking, they are finer. They seem a bit chunkier on the 72nd, and relatively in scale a lot chunkier. So I wish they wouldn't put them on somewhere like that when they could put them on the back. You know, they put them on the leading edge of the tails. It's not the ideal place, but anyway, there we go. So there we have it. I'm going to bring that forward now. Try and pop that in at the back. There we go. So that's our final word on the matter. I hope you found this interesting. I do like to go into a bit of detail, but I think that if you're building one or you're thinking of building one, use this as a reference. You'll find it very useful, I'm sure. Anyway, it's an 8 out of 10, but I hope you give me 10 out of 10 with a thumbs up. Thanks very much for joining me and for taking the interest and the time to watch it through. I do definitely like ICM. I think they've got some great kits. I think just be a bit careful about, you know, the way things are going together. Perhaps wasn't as good in that respect as I'd hoped, but as I say, I think the bigger version is a little bit better, and I'm hoping that their newer stuff, like we've seen the Bronco and the Cobra helicopter and various other things they're doing at the moment, which are looking really excellent. Thank you for joining me, and nice to see you in the new year. I hope you're going to have a healthy and wealthy and successful new year in 2022, and I hope in the not too distant future to have some more videos to entertain you with, hopefully of use and interest as well. And in the meantime, thanks very much for joining me. Take care of yourselves. Thanks a lot, and bye for now.